So on 8.4 homework, the very first problem says, find a polynomial function of degree 3 with real coefficients that has the given zeros. So on this problem, one thing I'm noticing is that if it has a degree of 3, then the highest power of x is going to be x to the third. I know that. They're telling me the zeros are -2, 3, and -4, and they give me a partial answer down here. So there would be my 3 zeros to my x to the third. So I'm going to go to just still working problem number 1. I'm going to go to the whiteboard just so I have more room. It's not squished up with everything else. So they tell me my zeros are -2, 3, and -4. So remember that if your zeros are these, that your factors are the opposite. So you would have x plus 2. Instead of it being a -2, you change it to +2. If it's a 3, it's going to be x minus 3. And if it's -4, it's going to be x plus 4. Well, the only way that I can get that their answer says, well, the answer is x to the third minus blank times x squared plus blank times x minus blank is for me to multiply that out. Okay, and so you're going to have to start using FOIL. X times x is going to be x squared. X times -3 is -3x. You're going to move to that second term. 2 times x is 2x, and then 2 times -3 is -6. We still have all of this times x plus 4, but before I do that, I'm going to try to reduce this down some. I know I can combine the -3x and the 2x together, and that's going to get me x squared minus 1x minus 6. Can at least do that. But this is no longer FOIL. We can't use first, outer, inner, last, but it's the exact same concept, right? You're going to take x squared and you're going to multiply it by both of these terms over here. So you're going to say x squared times x is x to the third. X squared times 4, 4x squared. Is anybody lost? Then we're going to move to the middle, this -1x, and we're going to need to do -1x times x and -1x times 4. -1x times x is -1x squared, and -1x times 4 is -4x. Okay, then we're going to move to that last term. -6 times x is -6x, and -6 times 4 is -24. So now we should be able to get to the answer. X to the third. We've got a 4x squared, and I don't see any other x squared, so this would be 4. No, I lied, right? I do see another x squared. I just wasn't looking very good. So we've got a positive 4x squared and a -1x squared. So 3x squared. I've got a -4 and a -6. So those two would go together to be -10 minus 24. Okay. And so really the only answer you needed was, I'm just making sure they've got a plus here. So we would do minus here. So it would end up being -3. They don't have a plus here, they have minus. But y'all good? You understand where we came up with the answer? Okay, I'm just trying to keep it as much like the other worksheet as I can. So the problem number 2 is similar to this, but anybody need me to wait? But they're telling me that they turned it up a notch because they said, okay, your zeros are 3, 3i, and -3i. So what is the function? This is number 2. So we would say x minus 3, that would take care of this one. This one would be x minus 3i, that would take care of this one. What's the next one going to be? If it's a minus 3i, it's going to be plus 3i, right? Okay. When you see one of these like this, where they're exactly the same, but one of them is positive and one of them is negative, that's the 2 you want to multiply first, because that will make your life easier. So they're going to have a lot of terms that are going to completely cancel out. So I want to multiply these 2 first. So because one of them is positive and one of them is negative, and I know ahead of time that's going to cause me to have an easier way to go. So let's look at that. We're going to do x times x and get x squared. X times 3i, it's going to be positive 3. And it doesn't matter if you say xi or ix. Okay, then we're going to come to the bottom. Negative 3xi or ix. And then the last term is, it's a negative, but it's 3i times 3i. So x squared, these 2, positive 3xi and negative 3xi, go away. This says minus 3 times 3 is 9, and I times I is I squared. Do y'all remember what I squared is from last week? Negative 1. I squared is negative 1. So this really means 9 times negative 1, which is going to be x squared plus 9 instead of x squared minus 9. I can't forget about my x minus 3 that I had in the front. So I'm multiplying x times x. That's going to give me x to the 3rd. X times 9 is going to give me 9x. Negative 3x squared. Negative 27. So I don't, on this one, I don't see everything has a different power of x. So I'm just putting things in order. But this would be my final answer on number 2. Okay. So it's not that this section is super difficult. It's just that if your handwriting is terrible, slow down, because you're going to get lost in it, because there's just a lot of writing to figure it out. And I understand that, because I sometimes myself get lost in my handwriting. If I accidentally write a plus and it's supposed to be a minus, or you're just going to have to slow down a little bit on these. Anybody need me to wait? All right, number 3. They're telling me that my zeros are square root of 2, negative square root of 2, and 5. So when we do this, we're saying x minus the square root of 2 times x. This one would, the opposite of a negative square root of 2 would be x plus square root of 2, and then x minus 5. This time we want to do these 2 in front, because they're exactly the same, except for one is a minus and one is a plus. And that's going to make my life easier if I get those to go together first. So x squared, x times the square root of 2 would be positive x square root of 2. In the back, we're going to have negative x square root of 2. And then the last term would be, I'm going to write this down. We're doing, it's negative times a positive, so it's going to be negative, but we're doing the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. So our x squared is there. These 2 cancel each other out. They're just 0. You can type this in the calculator, what the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is, but we talked a whole lot last Wednesday about what that was. If they're the same, what is it? It's just 2. Right, because it's the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. So this whole thing would be minus 4. okay? But I can't forget about my x minus 5. I have to bring it down. Then we're going to multiply that out. X squared times x would be x to the third. X squared times negative 5, negative 5x squared. Then we're going to move to the negative 4 times x, and then the negative 4 times negative 5 would be positive 20. And that should be the answer, because none of that's going to go together. I am not going to work number 4 for you, but I am going to help you get it set up. So on number 4, they're telling me the zeros are negative 1/3, 0, and 5. So when I write out my things that I'm multiplying, it would be x plus 1/3, and it doesn't matter, and x minus 0, and x minus 5. Okay, so when you do this term right here, x minus 0 is just an x. Most people put it up at the front. If this is me, I would multiply that x by that x at the end. I would do these two first and get that down to a reasonable thing, and then multiply everything by x. Y'all okay? Okay. On number 5. 5 says that it says find a polynomial function of degree 7. So remember that if it has a degree 7, that I'm going to have 7 possible roots, 7 zeros. It's degree 7. And it says that negative 2 is a root, and that negative 2 is a 0 with a multiplicity of 3. Okay, what that looks like is x plus 2 raised to the what? Third power, right? Then it tells me that 0 is a root with a multiplicity of 3. So that looks like x minus 0 to the third power. So far I've taken care of 3 roots and 3 more roots. That's 6. How many am I supposed to get to? 7. So, and 2 is a root with a multiplicity of 1. So there's my 3, and 3 is 6 plus 1 more is 7. So x minus 2 with a multiplicity of 1. And they actually want me to multiply this out. Which is one of the reasons why I was like, you're going to have to take your time on some of this, because there's just not an easy way. So the first thing I'm going to start out by doing the x plus 2 to the third. X minus 0 to the third is just x to the third power. So thank goodness I don't really have to do a lot of work with that. And then I've got an x minus 2 to the first. Is everybody okay with where I came up with that stuff? Is there a good place on this to start that's going to make my life easier? X plus 2, x minus 2, because they're exactly the same. I know that it looks complicated, but those two are exactly the same, except for one of them is positive and one of them is negative. So I want to start there, because that one's just going to turn into 2 terms, and it'll make my life a little bit easier. So x squared, negative 2x, positive 2x, and then negative 4. So when we reduce all that down, we just have x squared minus 4. We still have all this rest of this stuff, but at least we got that one down a little bit. Now it doesn't matter. I always save the x to the third to the very end, but that really is just up to you. So I'm just going to start with these two. Leave my x to the third there. X times x, x squared, 2x just doing FOIL. If you need me to stop and explain what I'm doing, I will do that. So I multiplied those. The two x's will go together, so I can get x squared plus 4x plus 4 times x squared minus 4. Okay, and like I said, I like to save that x to the third or whatever, this x by itself over here to the end. So I would go straight to multiplying x squared times x squared. I still have x to the third. X squared times x squared, that's x to the fourth. I also have to multiply x squared times the negative 4. So that's negative 4x squared. Then I would move to that middle term. 4x times x squared, that's positive 4x to the third. 4x times negative 4, negative 16x. And then I've got to take care of this 4 on the end. 4 times x squared and 4 times negative 4. So positive 4x squared and then negative 16. So I still have x to the third in the front. Can any of this stuff go together? I don't see any other x to the fourth. I don't see any other x to the thirds besides, so I took care of that and that. I have a negative 4x squared and a positive 4x squared, so those will just go away. Minus 16x minus 16. Then we would multiply that x to the third times all of those. Remember, when you're multiplying exponents, you're adding them. So x to the third times x to the fourth is x to the seventh. And then x to the third, not third, x to the third times 4x to the third would be 4x to the sixth. X to the third times negative 16x is negative 16x to the fourth. X to the third times negative 16 is negative 16x to the third. Okay. Questions about that stuff? It's not that it's difficult, it's just that it has so many steps. You got to slow down and make sure that you're getting that stuff right. Question number 6 is very similar to this. I'm not going to work that one for you. Number 7, suppose a polynomial of degree 4. It gives you some rational zeros. Anybody need me to slow down on this one before I go to another screen? Okay, so number 7 says that it tells you that you have some zeros, and it tells you that your zeros are negative 4, square root of 2, and 12 times the square root of 5. Okay, and we talked about on Wednesday that if you have an I or a square root, that you automatically have another zero that's going to be the opposite of that. Y'all remember? So this one doesn't have an I or a square root. This one doesn't have an I or a square root. So I'm really worried about this one. So if I've got a square root at positive square root of 2, then I have another one at negative square root of 2. That's exactly right. So on number 8, it's a similar problem. It's saying that you have, these are your zeros or your roots. Tells you that they're I and 9 and negative square root of 13, negative square root of 13, sorry. So we're really looking for other roots that we might have. And this says, suppose a polynomial function of degree 4 with rational coefficients has the following given numbers as zeros. Find the other zeros. So on this one, there would definitely be one here. This is positive I. This is going to be a negative I. So there's 4 right there. Let me see if did I write that down? Oh, I see what I did. Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, I must have done something wrong because that's not how I was taught to do math. This is supposed to be, that was supposed to be 9 minus the square root of 13. So there's 2 of our roots. So another one would be negative I. And when it's written like this with the square root, you would leave the 9 alone. But if you had minus, the other one was going to be plus square root of 13. Okay, 9 is very similar to this, so I'm not going to work that one. Any questions about that? Okay, so I am skipping over to 10. Find a polynomial function of lowest degree with rational coefficients that has the given numbers as some of its zeros. So it's telling me that my zeros, some of them are negative 2i and 8. Okay, well, 8's not going to have anything that goes with it, but negative 2i is going to have something that goes with it. What goes with it? Has to be another root. If you have a square root or you have an I, it has another root. It's the opposite of whatever that thing is. So when we work this problem, we're going to say, okay, I got to do x minus 8. That took care of this one. X plus 2i. That took care of this one. X minus 2i. That took care of this one. And you're multiplying that stuff out. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 2i is negative 2xi. I did these 2 first because they were exactly the same but opposites of each other. So it's going to save me some work. Plus 2xi, and then when you multiply the last 2, you get minus 4i squared. So this thing is x squared minus 4i squared. What is I squared the same as? Negative 1. I is equal to the square root of negative 1. I squared is negative 1. So this just means negative 4 times negative 1. So this really is x squared plus 4. Everybody okay with that? Then we would do our terms, our other term, multiply by that. So x to the third plus 4x negative 8x squared minus 32. On 11, if one of our zeros, so if you're on chat or if you're on Zoom right now, go ahead and you can use words if you don't have, I know you don't have a square root button, you just type out the words. But if on number 11, if they're telling me that my zeros are square root of 2 and 3i, then what's another zero I have to have? Which one's going to go square root of 2? Negative square root of 2. And if I have 3i, if I have a positive 3i, I'm going to have a negative 3i. I'm not going to multiply all that stuff out for you. We've done, I think you know what you're going to have to do there, right? X minus square root of 2 times x plus square root of 2 times x minus 3i times x plus 3i. Okay? So if you are on Zoom, you should be typing in those answers. You would type that in. So that's 11. Okay, number 12 kind of turns it around a little bit. So let's work an example of that. Number 12 says you have a function. Your function is x to the third plus 3x squared minus 5x minus 15. And they tell you that one of your zeros is negative 3. And it says find the other zeros. Okay. So one of your options is to go to your poly root finder and type it in and see if it'll give you the roots, right, on your apps. But more than likely, the other roots are not going to be, they're going to be imaginary or they're going to be square roots and you're going to have some issues from there. So what you need to do on a problem like this is you need to do what we did on that last example we did on 8.4, where you said, okay, I know that negative 3 is supposed to go in this. It told me that it's supposed to go in this evenly and I'm supposed to have a remainder of 0. So remember that you got to go in order. So x to the third, x squared, x to the first, and our constant term. And this time we do everything's there, so we don't have to put any zeros because I've got everything in order. So we're going to use our synthetic division. 1 times -3, -3. You add those things together and get 0. 0 times -3 is 0. You add that together and get -5. -5 times -3 is +15. When you add that together, you get 0. So from this point, you look at what you have left. We started with an x to the third, so that means this is 1x squared plus 0x minus 5 equals 0. So we really just have x squared minus 5 equals 0. From this point, you could, this is a quadratic, so you could use your quad program on your calculator to find the other zeros, or you could just solve it because it's not that hard to do by adding 5. If you want to make yourself a note that you could use your quad program from here, that's fine. But I'm adding 5, taking the square root of both sides. So that's going to be x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. So the answer is, these are my other two zeros. They gave me -3. Those would be my other two. Anybody need me to wait? Okay. So on 13, I'm sorry for those of you who understand this, but I feel like for some of us, this might be an issue. They're telling me that one of my zeros is 6i. So, and they're starting me out with, this is my function, x to the 4th plus 27x squared minus 324. So if one of my zeros is 6i, what's another one? -6i. I know that. So I can use synthetic division to kind of get this down to something more manageable. I've got an x to the 4th. I don't have any x to the 3rd, so that would be a 0 there. 27x squared, 0x's minus 324. I know my remainder is supposed to be 0 because I'm sorry. This should not be a 0 here because we're trying to see if either 6i or -6i goes. I'm sorry, I don't know why I put 0 there, but anyway, so we're going to bring down our 1. 1 times 6i is 6i. Adding these, so this is 6i multiplying 6i times 6i. So that's, I'm going to write this kind of small, but 6i times 6i would be 36i squared. What is I squared? So this is -36 because it's 36 times -1, right? When you add 27 and -36, you get -9. Times 6i is -54i. Add those. -54i times 6i ends up being, okay, hold on a minute. We should not be getting negative. Hold on. So we got 1. Oh, you're right. My brain's not working. Not the first time today my brain hadn't worked, but there we go. -54i times 6i is -324i squared, which is why y'all are hollering at me that this needs to be, that's -324 times -1, which gives us +324. So when we add that, we do get our 0. Okay. So if I were to write the answer right here, this would be 1x to the what? 3rd. Okay. Yes, that's where I would go from here. I would, before I did anything else, I would say, okay, let's do the -6i. And I'm just going to bring down my numbers. I know that the remainder of this should be 0. So I'm going to bring down this 1. 1 times negative 6i is negative 6i. 0 times negative 6i is 0. If you need me to slow down on any of this, like you don't understand where I'm coming up with it, please holler at me. We've done this, I guess, for a couple of weeks now, but negative 9 times negative 6i would be positive 54i. We add those, we're going to get 0. So now we're left with 1, 0, negative 9. I started out with an x to the 4th, but I divided out twice. So now I'm down to an x squared. Is that okay? So we divided out the 6i, that got us down to the x to the 3rd. And then when we divided out the negative 6i, that got us down to x squared. So this is really 1 x squared plus 0x minus 9. So at this point, you could use the quad program if you wanted to find the other zeros, or you could just solve this. It's not that hard to do. Take the square root on both sides. And so we would get, well, x is plus or minus 3. So our other two zeros would be positive 3 and negative 3. This would be our final answer, what our zeros are. Okay. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on problem number 14, but I do want you to at least have heard of it before. I just feel like with the technology that you all have, way back in the ancient days when I was in college, when I was in high school and we were trying to find these roots, we didn't have a graphing calculator or a program to use to even start with. Because if this is me on number 14 and it says find all the possible whatever rational zeros or find the roots, I would go, oh, I've got a graphing calculator. I'm going to go to the poly root finder and I'm going to type this in. I'm going to see if I can at least get started on one and then divide out. Okay. But there wasn't that option. So you had there was a theory that said basically if you took and you wrote down all the factors of negative 21. So this last, what are factors of negative 21? Plus or minus, sorry. Yeah, you're saying them all. So plus or minus 1 would go into 21. Positive 1 and positive 3 and negative 3 will go into 21. Positive 7 and negative 7 will go into 21. Positive and negative 21 will go into 21. So then what you do is you'd look at all the numbers that would go into the first term, the first coefficient that's in front of your biggest exponent. So you'd say, okay, well, 1 will go into there. 2 will go into 22, plus or minus 11 will go into 22, plus or minus 22 will go into 22. And that's it. So all the possible answers. So we potentially have a list of, so we could list 1 over each one of these things on the bottom. So 1 over 1, 1 over 2, 1 over 11, 1 over 22. We could also go negative 1 over 1, negative 1 over 2, negative 1 over 11, negative 1 over 22. You get me? Then we would move to the 3 over 1, 3 over 2, 3 over 11, 3 over 22. You list every possibility, negative 3 over 1, every combination you could think of, negative 3 over 2, negative 3 over 11. Those would all be options that I would just have to try one of these and hope one of them works when I'm dividing out, okay? If you follow this theorem, it's everything over everything, okay? And so on 14, the right answer ends up being A. If you want to circle it on your paper, you would list every possibility over every possibility. They've just combined them as plus or minus. Does that make sense to you all? Yeah. Okay. So 15 is the exact same thing. 16 says find the rational zeros and then the other zeros of the polynomial function x to the 3rd minus 111x plus 110. And solve it for f of x equals 0. So I'm not going to work 16 and 17, but I do want to at least work one of them. So they're telling me that my function is x to the third minus 111x plus 110. They want me to find the zeros of this function. Okay, so where do I even start? Smartest thing to do is cubic. So could I try my polyroot finder and see if I can get one from there? I mean, we could give that a go and see if it gives us one. So I would go to my graphic calculator and I'd go apps. Let me get out of this. We are polyroot finder. I went to apps, pick polyroot finder, but this one's just an x to the third. So I can scoot over there and pick that one. And it is 1x to the third. We don't have any x squareds. We have 111 x's. I do not know what movie's going on over there, but it is loud. Plus, oh, it's a negative 111. I'll go back and fix that. Thank you for telling me. Plus 110. Okay, so did we type everything in right? So actually this gave us all of our roots, negative 11, 10, and 1, right? If it didn't give me all of them, I could divide out one and then figure out what the other two are, just like we've done on every one of them. So I'm going to get out of that. Okay, so on this one, here's what the answer kind of looks like when you write down the answer on number 16. You're going to say there are only rational zeros. We didn't have any that weren't rational. There are only rational zeros, and they were negative 11, 1, and 10. Okay. So if there's not rational zeros, you need to find one of them, divide it out, then find the other two, or however many there are. Okay, so that is how you do 8.4 homework.